Welcome back, everyone. My name is Veronica Sansev, and I'm one of the co-founders of CommerceNext. For those of you who are just joining us, CommerceNext is a community event series and conference for marketers at retail and direct-to-consumer brands. On behalf of my co-founders, Scott Silverman and Alan Dick, I want to welcome you to the second half of day one of the CommerceNext Virtual Summit. Thank you for tuning in live, and for those watching on the replay. This is a live event, so bear with us. We really wanted to lean into the interactivity of this, but with that comes some hiccups. So bear with us as we kind of run through this event, and we'll make sure you have great content and a great experience. If you have any questions, please cue them into the chat functionality. It's there. We have someone screening it, and we'll have your questions live for the panelists to answer. A lot of our speakers are going to stay afterwards to answer them via chat, and some of them will be able to answer them live. We're also going to ask you some questions via our live polls, so be ready for that. And if you want to engage on social, use the hashtag CNVS2020. So I'm going to turn on the slides. I want to go through a few important announcements. First of all, we're back with our weekly webinar series on August 12th at 2 p.m. Why 2020 is actually the year of mobile. If you want to join us for that, the link is bit.ly/CNWeb16. We also have our Holiday Optimization Summit. It's on October 7th at 1 p.m. And it's really going to help you get the most out of the digital first holiday season. Registration isn't open yet, but please save the date. Now, I want to quickly walk you through the agenda. First, I want to let you know that the handouts, which I'll show you how to find, include a pocket agenda, and that pocket agenda will help you follow along with us as we go through the virtual summit. Our first session is about advertising diversification, and it's a panel with Hims, Hers, Rothy's, 2 p.m. and Pebble Post. We then talk about reimagining retail with Katie Hunt from Showfields. Then we go into a presentation and fireside chat on accelerating e-commerce growth. And then we close with a fireside chat on brand purpose, lessons learned from Brands Buy Better. I also want to let you know that we are doing text announcements during this virtual summit, so you can be aware of sessions that are happening and when they're going live. All you need to do is text 29631. Text commerce to that short code. This service is powered by Attentive, and we only are going to text you over these next 2 days. We're not going to keep texting you afterwards. So it's really just to stay informed. Just a few housekeeping notes. Don't worry if you miss anything. You can download the slides and the handouts now or later. We're also recording this summit, and we'll make all the videos available for replay. And finally, you can ask questions, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So you will see a panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you click on Q&A, you enter your question on the bottom. We are screening questions. We will post the questions into published once they're live. Take a look at the questions. If there's anything that you see that you really want answered, upvote that question. That will help us understand the priority questions to answer. Finally, here's where you can find your handouts. It's on the handout link in the very top of the panel. There you'll find the slides, the handouts from our sponsors, the pocket agenda, and our research report. So feel free to peruse, grab any information you like there. And then, of course, if you're watching it on the replay, you can find those handouts at the bottom of your player. So with that, I'm excited to introduce our first panel. Is advertising diversification still needed? This is obviously a very hot topic. There's been a lot of discussion about advertising diversification. First, when it came to kind of the high prices of Google and Facebook, and then, with the Facebook boycott. So there's a lot to discuss here. I'm going to have the panelists turn on their camera. This session is moderated by Farzana Nasser, partner at Chameleon Collective. All right, cameras are turning on, everything's working. Farzana, are you with us? Melissa, you're muted, just so you know. I see the mute there, so make sure you unmute that. And we just need to get Farzana on. And there she goes.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So my name is Farzana Nasser. I'm a partner at Chameleon Collective. And the topic for today's panel is advertising diversification still needed? So this panel will explore whether advertising diversification is still critical for brands post-pandemic and how the boycott Facebook movement may change the media landscape. And we have an awesome group of panelists here today, so I'd like to give them all an opportunity to introduce themselves with name, title, and if you could share a little bit about your respective businesses as well, that would be great. Melissa, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, so I'm Melissa. I lead product at PebblePost. PebblePost is a digital to direct mail platform that uses online intent to influence and power direct mail campaigns for brands.
Great. Matt?
Hey, I'm Matt Gehring, SVP of Growth at Rothy's. Rothy's, we transform sustainable materials into timeless shoes, accessories, other items.
And we have Emily next.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm the VP of Marketing Acquisition at Hims and Hers, and we are bringing healthcare to the masses. We're a digital health platform.
And Webb.
Hello, Webb Smith here, founder of 2PM Incorporated. We are a B2B media company for the e-commerce industry and a direct-to-consumer brand holding company. I'm also the former, the co-founder of Mizzen & Main.
Fantastic. So let's dive right in. We're really in a pretty interesting situation right now, given the COVID-19 pandemic. Advertisers have found Facebook and Google becoming a lot more efficient when you have entire industries that have pulled out of those platforms, like the travel industry and the entertainment industry. And then at the same time, there's been a lot of concerns about brand safety on some of these platforms, given the boycott Facebook movement. From your perspective, I think it'd be great to hear what you guys are seeing on your end and how you feel about diversification as a whole. Do you think that it is become more important, less important, or is it equally just as important as it was at the start of this year?
Yeah, I'd say equally important. It's kind of always important.
How about you, Emily?
Yeah, absolutely. Equally as important. It's always important to, finding scale, diversifying your customer mix, being prepared for geopolitical events that might change the landscape of your media mix.
Melissa, what do you think?
Yeah, similar to Emily, I think it's always important. Consumer behaviors are changing, and that's so evident now. So I feel like diversification can just adapt and evolve as behaviors change.
And Webb, what are you seeing on your end?
I think that they all said it really well. I would just like to emphasize that, as customer acquisition costs continue to fall off thanks to major advertisers pulling out, it's probably urgent that direct-to-consumer brands really take advantage of that while they can.
Great. Yeah, it sounds like this is the reality. It's here to stay, and marketers have to figure out how to embrace it. And so the question then becomes, how do you diversify? How do you balance this tension between, scaling these tried and true channels and experimentation and testing on new channels? And where do you start for brands that are early on in the stage? What channels should they be looking at? How should they be thinking about investing? And how do they balance this from a media mix perspective as far as how they're investing their dollars and their budgets? Matt, what are your thoughts on, broadly speaking, what are the types of channels that advertisers should be thinking about? How do you balance this testing and experimentation dichotomy versus, doing what is going to work at the onset?
Yeah, so it's a little bit to what Emily had first said. You are always testing, you're always looking at new opportunities. And I think for me, it really should start with where are your customers? How can you get in front of them? And kind of what Webb noted, where are the opportunities from a cost perspective? So what are the channels that, because of the dynamic shifts that we're dealing with right now, people are at home more, they're potentially listening to podcasts more, they're maybe interacting with direct mail more than they normally would. So understanding what's happening with those dynamics, and then can you efficiently get in front of them? But for me, it's always been, you build out your core channels. For a lot of us, it was built off of Facebook. That's where a lot of DTC brands seem to kind of start, and then you supplement with other ones. And you always want to have this kind of testing mentality and trying new channels to make sure that you remain diverse.
Great. Emily, would you agree with that? Are there certain channels that you're experimenting with right now that you want to talk about?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, I would add to Matt, we're always thinking about, where are we going to find efficiency during a given time, but we're also always looking to explore new opportunity. And so we get comfortable with about a 20% of our media spend going to test channels to really understand, is there opportunity in that space, and what can we learn? And so it allows us to maintain efficiency on our core mix, but gives us some buffer so we can explore. During this time, we've seen a lot of efficiency on the Facebook side. We've also seen a lot of efficiency on the TV side. I'd say it's very much varying week to week. And so we're being very nimble in how we choose to spend our dollars as we review results and enter the next week.
That's great. So you're optimizing your spend on a weekly basis based on how you're spending by channel?
Yeah, right now we are trying to optimize on a weekly basis where we can. There's definitely channels where that's harder to do. More of your kind of offline TV audio channels require more time. It also depends on how much you're spending in order to see kind of statistically significant results that you want to optimize on. And so we try to go into these shorter time periods during this time because every week is so different, but it does vary.
Melissa, I'm curious, Matt mentioned, consumer behavior changing and direct mail maybe being a channel that more brands are starting to consider as a result of that. Are you seeing that uptick on your end?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, direct mail has been a proven tactic to engage with consumers at home, and we believe wholeheartedly in that, especially now where we're all at home in this pandemic era, but also home is where the decisions are being made. So it's just really important that you find different touch points and new ways to engage with consumers directly at home.
That's great. And, in addition to looking at the media mix, in isolation of the company, we start to think about the stage of the company and where it makes sense to invest based on, early stage versus later stage companies. But I know you've seen kind of the whole gamut of like very early seed stage companies to actually working at much larger brands as well. What are your thoughts on how that media mix should change depending on company stage?
Yeah, I think that Matt pointed out a great point earlier. It's all about finding the arbitrage opportunities, especially when you're an earlier brand, and even more especially when you may not have like the funding levels of larger brands. So, whether it's programmatic TV ads right now, I know that's gearing up, or again, taking advantage of Facebook spend now that a lot of the major advertisers have dropped out. I think there are ways to sort of build momentum around specific verticals of ad spend.
Emily, you and I had a great conversation around thinking about not just company stage, but product type. So within HIMS, there's multiple different product types, and thinking about the media mix based on the product as well and the consumer for each product. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are launching a lot of products, in any given month, and we have different goals for those products. The products might be something that are intended to nurture our current base and provide, more access to them, and other products that are more to bring in an entirely new customer to our platform. And so we, start there in understanding what is the right kind of own versus paid channel mix we want to have. We also look at our margins on those products to understand what kind of marketing we can support as we're going in and learning how to even begin to message and what kind of channels are resonating with customers. We have to assess that margin to understand the risks that we want to take on for our business. Every product we launch has a different set of competitors, a different kind of customer type that is interested, and the kind of message that we need to share in order to get someone interested in our platform. And so it will very much vary what media mix we use for each product to accommodate those goals.
That makes a lot of sense. Matt, at Rothy's, are you thinking about it from a product perspective, or is the consumer the same across most product lines?
It does vary. I mean, it's really similar to what Emily said. We don't have as wide range of product portfolio as they do, but it does look at who's going to buy our lace-up sneaker that we just launched this last week. How is she different from our point flat buyer that we originally started the brand with, 4+ years ago? So we're looking at when we launch products, how it relates to our customer base. And then we're thinking about like, what's the right channel to introduce that customer to the product. And overall, like what Emily talked about with margin, I mean, that's really key. And I think that overall that really drives how we think about the media mix at really most companies around like, what's that overall business goal? And how do you think about customer acquisition? Are you willing to acquire a customer at a loss? Are you looking at some kind of payback period versus are you trying to operate profitably with every order? But the mix and where that channel kind of comes into play in terms of driving that order is also sort of another factor you need to think through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great segue to KPIs and measurement. You know, as you're thinking about the media mix and what your goals are, how do you actually create KPIs that make sense? How do you measure it? What are you thinking about as far as, you know, figuring out incrementality and things like that? Melissa, do you have thoughts on that as it relates to direct mail specifically and how you're actually setting KPIs for campaigns for your clients?
Yeah, definitely. So we wholeheartedly believe in incrementality and lift measurement, especially for our channel that kind of straddles digital and direct mail. It's really important to help brands understand incremental impact that programmatic direct mail can have on their KPIs, but also how we fit in the larger media mix. So we really lean on incrementality, but we also always have an ROI or like laser focus on getting ROI for our brands. So.
Great. Emily, are you focused on, are you looking at incrementality? Are you looking at ROI? Are there multiple different measurements you're looking at depending on the channel? How are you thinking through those things?
Yeah, we look at everything. And so we have CAC LTV targets for each product, and we're, you know, figuring out what ratio is right for each channel depending on the customer coming in. We see some channels have much stronger LTV than others, and so it actually gives us more of an ability to go test and do more broad top of funnel marketing that is harder to measure. We're spending a lot of time doing modeling to get very sophisticated on our offline channels. We do a lot of regression modeling, pre versus post on TV and audio to really assess the impact there. We're doing a lot of couponing and how did you hear about us surveys as well to, you know, really bridge the gap where we're not able to model us perfectly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, measurement continues to be one of those elusive things that everyone is still figuring out in a real-time basis. Webb, from your perspective, well, when you look at like companies from an investor perspective, are there certain metrics that you're looking at as far as how they're spending their dollars to provide value?
I think I look at it holistically. So I tend to try to, this is specific to me. So I tend to try to look for direct-to-consumer brands that have raised small sums of money that also have great organic growth through their own channels. So whether they control their own media or they have built communities around their products, those are early indicators that if they do raise larger sums of venture capital, then they're going to be able to achieve profitability through paid or otherwise, paid marketing channels or otherwise, in the not too distant future.
Got it. That makes sense. And Matt, on your end, how are you measuring by channel?
It is, so the KPIs, it's really similar to what Emily talked about, but it's channel specific. And the other factor that we look at is sort of the purpose of that channel. So is it more of a higher funnel awareness building? So we think of, say, something like Pinterest that we view as more upper funnel, a great way to introduce people to our brand. We're still going to measure a CAC or CPA around that, but we're also going to pull in broader kind of awareness-based measurements, understanding what it's doing with our aided and unaided awareness, understanding how that flows into other channels. And so having MTA and MMM, so multi-touch attribution or media mix models that help you figure out where to direct that spend in order to achieve that kind of channel specific goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Emily, you mentioned that there's a number of channels that are more difficult to measure. And so thinking about ways around basically creating that bridge to figure out how to measure those harder to measure channels like podcasts, like OTT, out of home. Can you talk a little bit more about the tactics that you're using to bridge that?
Yeah, all these spaces are getting a lot smarter. And so, it's exciting to kind of test and learn with them. Podcasts, there's a lot of different things and new things that we do. We just started pixeling, which is super exciting. So we can understand, the audience listening. Are they then coming back to our site? We're still doing How Did You Hear About Us surveys to really understand that kind of multiplier we want to apply as well. Offline, billboards in cities we buy a lot of, and it's probably one of the most difficult to measure. We're doing, enough of a kind of local takeover that we can assess lift in those markets. And we're comparing those markets to similar markets as a baseline and to assess seasonality to see what is the true lift in those markets. So not a perfect science, but really helps us get, closer to understanding the impact there. TV and audio, we also do a lot of dark periods, so we can assess, business baselines and then the incrementality when we are to go back live on those programs.
Matt, I know you do a lot of testing on these channels as well. Would you say that you're using similar approaches to this?
Yeah, very, very similar. The How Did You Hear About Us survey is important. Doing the kind of geo holdouts where you find cities with similar penetration, similar dynamics, and then see how those kind of, it's a way, you're doing a little bit of a kind of incrementality testing with it, but very, very similar approach. And a lot of it is kind of triangulating all of the different data points that you're getting, looking in platform, looking what your site sees, looking what your attribution tool sees, those types of elements.
Okay, great. This is a nice segue into traditional media and the role that traditional media as a whole plays in the media mix. Melissa, from a direct mail perspective, what's your perspective on what the role for direct mail is specifically?
Yeah, so direct mail is a proven tactic that really has its place in the marketing mix for breaking through the noise and the clutter, especially in today's world with digital and email being so cluttered, and having that direct engagement with the consumer at home, which I mentioned earlier was kind of where the decisions are being made. But from our perspective at PublePost, we have now realized the impact of that tangible physical mail and have kind of amplified it by using that digital intent to power and influence that direct mail to make sure it's relevant to the consumer, because that ultimately performs for brands. So how we view it.
And Matt, what's your experience with direct mail?
Use it a lot of different places. For me, again, I kind of go back to that whole, how do I meet her for Rothy's, meet her or meet our customer in a different way, and how does it drive incrementality? Like it's, how do you capture different demand? How do you kind of push a narrative along? How do you introduce new products? So it can be a really good resource, both from prospecting as well as from re-engagement, getting your base to come back and buy again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's another interesting segue to how you actually balance out that media mix from a prospecting perspective versus a retargeting perspective. Webb, I know you've worked with a number of companies in this space that are trying to do some interesting things mid and bottom funnel. What's your perspective on the value of retargeting and the focus for that?
I think that I have a tremendous respect for the retargeting processes. Listen, I think that with the brands that I work with, I think that finding ways to achieve more organic top funnel growth so that you're spending more at mid or lower funnel, I think is something that you're seeing again with the much younger brands. As you get to the levels of Rothy's and Hims and Hers, obviously they have a lot more sophistication and a greater ability to track at that top of funnel. But for the younger brands, I think that there's definitely a trend towards partnerships and media influencer buys that are cheaper top of funnel so that they're spending more mid funnel for trackable retargeting.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Emily, do you have any thoughts on the retargeting side of the equation?
Yeah, so we, have different kinds of marketing for, targeting different pieces of the funnel. For us, in the kind of classic retargeting sense, we actually don't do so much with kind of pixeling and retargeting customers that come into our flow because we are HIPAA compliant. And so we get very creative with the kinds of targeting to try to hit people that we believe already have come to the site or are aware of the brand. but aren't maybe as robust as someone like Matt, who has less complications when it comes to pixeling.
Mm-hmm. Matt, would you agree with that? Less complications for you?
I'm glad I don't have Emily's complications around HIPAA compliance. But it's really looking at, is this customer who already exists, and I guess we break apart retargeting both from a new and existing perspective. So, but is she going to come back and buy again? Do we need to get another ad in front of her? And then thinking about some of the offline channels like TV, out of home, the podcasts, where you're not as easily able to exclude customers. Whereas like, Facebook, we can make sure that we're not hitting our existing customers, those types of things. So you look at that and you look at measurement around the orders between new and existing when you spin those channels up, and how it impacts kind of new versus repeat visitors. So it definitely plays into the media mix. And I think it's kind of how you look through that flow of getting that person aware of your brand, getting them to think about visiting the site, and then qualifying that traffic and getting, spending the right amount of money to get them to come back and buy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes a lot of sense, thinking about the whole life cycle. Melissa, how do you guys approach that from a retargeting perspective?
Yeah, so we've seen retargeting just be very powerfully important and performant for our brands, mainly because the consideration and the research all starts online. So we're able to really leverage that. But also there's a lot of, to Matt's earlier point, we also break it out between new and existing customers, and brands have a hard time understanding who these anonymous visitors are if you have no pre-existing relationship with them. So we're able to connect those online signals to household address and then follow up with that tangible physical piece. That has been really highly forming us in our brands.
That's great. Well, we have a couple minutes left, so let's wrap up with one final question before we close this up. Looking to the future, I think it'd be great to get your perspective on what areas of channel diversification will remain a strategic priority for brands over the long term. Like what are the things that brands should be focusing on when you have much more of a longer term horizon down the road? Emily, what are your thoughts on that looking forward?
Yeah, so I'm super excited about channel diversification. I think, COVID, what's been fun as a marketer is to see shifts in behavior of where consumer eyeballs are and how do you adapt to that. A couple things that get me really excited, Attentive is a sponsor of this today, and their platform is really incredible. Engagement through text message is really an exciting space. Content is also an exciting space. It's generally a free space to play in, and there's a lot of amazing ways to utilize it. Com recently announced that they have a Netflix show coming out, and so people are doing some very unique and clever things to diversify their mix, and so lots of ways to play in it, even online.
That's great. Yeah, that's pretty innovative with a Netflix show and so many different opportunities to do things that are really different. Webb, what's your thoughts on this? What's the future here?
I actually am looking forward to seeing larger scale direct to consumer brands partner with existing media companies, whether through actual acquisition or joint venture. I think you're going to see a lot more of these media companies that are trying to extend their lifetime value, and the brands working with these companies that could help them to lower their cost of customer acquisition. So you're going to see more sort of lower level brands and independent media companies partnering with one another, if not potentially acquiring one or the other in the coming months.
Interesting. Lots of consolidation in the industry, sounds like. Matt, how about you on your end? What are you thinking about for the future?
Definitely echo the content side that people mentioned, and just how product and brands start to weave themselves more into content we interact with at a daily basis. I mean, I think what I'm really looking for the most in the future is really better understanding of how channels interact, and across all those different touch points, from how channels interact from an awareness perspective, how they interact once you're starting to get people on your site, and then once they've made a purchase and you're trying to get them to come back. So some of the pixel improvements that have happened, like with podcasts now, being able to kind of tie a digital piece to sort of more of an offline event, or things like Pebble Post is doing, where you're able to tie together somebody that visits your site and then drive that specifically with a direct mail piece, I think are this kind of cool merging of online and offline.
Great. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you so much, everyone. This was a fantastic conversation, and I think there might be some Q&A at the end, so I'll let Veronica take it from here.
Yes, thank you all for joining. And actually, what we're going to do is move the Q&A to the chat. There's some folks that asked questions in the chat, and I know most of the panelists can stay on. If you can just go into the Q&A chat function and answer the questions, I think you'll have some very happy audience members. So you guys can turn your camera off. We're really grateful, really good insights. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I'm now going to kick off a quick poll. Excluding grocery, how many different stores have you visited since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic? The options are none, just grocery, 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 10, or 10 plus. And this is really your consumer point of view. So I'm curious how much you guys are out there shopping. And it looks like most of you guys have been out. It seems like the big winner is 1 to 3 stores. Some people have been to 4 to 6, and there's a brave 7% of you that have been to 10 or more stores, and still 18% who haven't gone anywhere beyond groceries. And now we're going to reimagine retail and talk about store experiences post-COVID. And now I'm excited to have Katie Hunt, co-founder and CRO of Showfields, join us on the virtual stage. Katie's going to help us reimagine retail by sharing her perspective on what store experiences will look like post-COVID. Katie, turn on your camera and join me.
Hi, Veronica.
Hi, Katie. Welcome. We're excited to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's always a fun excuse to feel like you're Zooming in front of other people.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have a great discussion, and I would love it if you would kick it off. For those that don't know Showfields, tell them what you do.
Sure. So it's a slightly hard concept to explain because it is so out there to some extent, but we're reimagining retail through the eyes of the consumer. And what that means is a physical location that changes every 6 months and has a rotating cast of characters, including artists and emerging brands and more established brands, but it's experiential retail. Everything from a slide from our 3rd floor to our 2nd floor, to tastings, to experiences, to art, and we just opened our 2nd location in Miami.
That is awesome. I've been to your stores, and they're like really a delightful experience. It's truly like an adventure, like going somewhere between going to a museum and on a scavenger hunt. It's very cool.
Yeah, we like to say that it lives in that blurry line between the MoMA and the Children's Museum. So you feel like you can touch everything, but everything is super elevated and you're learning, and you get to come in and really meet and hear new stories around brands and artists.
That's awesome. And obviously, you know, much of retail has been closed since COVID. So how did that whole experience change?
Yeah, so I mean, there was definitely a moment of panic across the entire team when we shut our doors, and we actually did close our doors before New York even, made the mandate to do so. For us in what we call consumer commerce, C-commerce, the most important thing is our guests and our team. So we did shut our doors on March 15th, and I'm very lucky to have a very flexible and brilliant team, because within 3 weeks we had live video shopping up and available. So now we have anywhere from 5 to 7 shows a week, and they're anything from art curations to tastemakers from around the globe walking you through a cooking class to someone talking about their favorite wellness brands. And all of the videos, you can shop them right there without even leaving the screen.
Wow, that's really cool. What a way to reinvent yourself.
You had to come up with something, right?
Right. We were all reinventing ourselves. CommerceNext has reinvented itself. So let's just talk about, obviously the pandemic has accelerated e-commerce adoption. by a number of years. But I don't think stores are going away. I think most people don't think stores are going away, but they do need to be reimagined. So what is the role of stores as more consumers shop online?
So I think the word that you use there is really important. It was an accelerant. It was accelerant across e-commerce, but I think it was also an accelerant across traditional retail. We're seeing a lot of stores closing, a lot of outdated models, having to find a new path forward. And what we had predicted was sort of this change was a few years out, but here we are, and we're watching this happen faster than ever. But what is really pushing this forward is the consumer. The consumer is more advanced than they've ever been before, and they also want things in a different way. What we believe that is c-commerce. So there's always been this idea of traditional retail and direct-to-consumer being different continents, but they're not. Slowly, these two things came together and they formed one land, which we call consumer commerce. And in that world, in the same way that Uber was created because a consumer wants to find a taxi easier, or Warby Parker was created because people want to shop from their glasses from home, it's reimagining the retail experience through the eyes of the consumer. So for us, it's not that the future of retail is going away. Retail is not going anywhere. Retail supercharges a customer. Retail is a meaningful experience between yourself and a brand, and it's also supposed to be really fun. It's just about finding a way to storytell for a consumer now that is meaningful to them. It can't be about you, can't be about your brand, it can't be about the store. It always has to be about reimagining for them. And if you can do that, and if you can remain flexible, and if you can hear the feedback of your consumer and stay where they are, you're never actually having to reinvent yourself. You're actually moving with the trend. So for us, we believe that consumer-focused retail is going nowhere. It's just that maybe we need to have a better conversation in some places with our consumer and how they want to see things and how they want to experience them.
Got it. And that makes a lot of sense. And I want to just double click on that for a second. What creates a compelling store experience? And maybe you can give some examples from what Showfields did in that area.
Sure. So for us, it's about engaging your five senses. And for us, that's clearly changed post-COVID as well. And we've had to reimagine that. But it's about walking away with something that is incredibly memorable. That no matter what, even if you didn't purchase a thing in the store, that you walked away and you felt that there was value in that circumstance for you. I think that there are so many incredible brands out there that have these amazing stories. And it's almost like direct-to-consumer founders are the new pop stars of our generation. We read about them in the New York Times now. We follow their lives. And the reason why is these people went out there with these crazy dreams and they completely reimagined things. But they also did so by pushing the table stakes in a different way, making their products completely sustainable, becoming B Corps, having great, policies within their companies to keep people happy and safe and giving back. And so, in this world where, that is the story, it's a lot easier to tell those stories in a physical space. For us, it's show and fields, right? Half of our store is show, which is dedicated to experiences and emerging artists and crazy over-the-top experiences. We even had a live theater production that you didn't even know you were entering into for a period of time, which was Sleep No More meets retail, where you got to the bottom of the slide and there was an actor waiting there for you. And she was like, how'd you get here? Let me walk you through my house. So we've definitely tried all things. But at the end of the day, I want someone to come through the store and walk out mind blown. And if they can do that, they're going to remember the things that they met and touched and tasted during that experience. And they're going to go tell other people about them. And that's the fun of retail.
And so for you guys, you do that through a lot of art, through a lot of, storytelling. What are some other ways? For example, Adidas, I think it's Adidas, and their flagship store has a track where you can run around the track and then they can recommend what shoes what are ways that retailers can create that experience for their own brands?
It's always about listening to the consumer, right? And listening to what they want from you and what they think you're an expert in. I think Nike is doing a really cool thing right now by opening the 200 neighborhood stores. They're tailoring the inventory in every single store to that neighborhood. And that's the future of retail. It's not about one store for everybody. It's about walking into something and feeling as if you're seen, as if someone has curated a store just for you and just for your needs. I think that, it's about finding new ways to kind of break the monotony of walking into seeing just racks of the same things in every store, and, storytelling, through your own lens. So yes, having a track, yes, having a tasting experience. I mean, we've got a lot of brands now launching VR, try-on experiences, and by appointment shopping. But I think it's about what you want to tell as your brand, as your story, and then building something around that. For us, it's about discovery. So it's about you meeting new brands and new artists, and that's the thing that we want to do. We want you to go through a journey of discovery, and that includes, we now have an audio tour called the Magic Wand. But for all stores, I think it's about reimagining again through the consumer, and then figuring out what's important to them and building that.
Yeah. And you actually kind of started touching on a point that I wanted to cover. So specifically, with consumers, some consumers being reluctant to go to stores due to COVID-19, what can retailers do to create these in-store experiences digitally? You mentioned AR, I've heard like Zoom consultations, like what else can they do?
So I think there's two streams, right? We have a group of customers who are very excited to be back in our 11 Bond location, and to be back in the store and have that joy and be back in New York City. And that's super exciting. But even within that consumer base, we have consumers who want no physical contact with anybody else while they're in the store. And we have consumers who are like, hey, I really want like a little bit of a socially distanced group tour because I miss other people. So it's about building on a spectrum, right? You have to remember that you have customers at different comfort levels, and they should never have to ask for what makes them comfortable. It should be offered on a menu, and they should be able to go in that direction. So for our customers who want no contact, we have the Magic Wand app. They download an app on their phone. It's an audio tour in the app. They can ask questions. They can learn about every piece of art. They can learn about every piece of brand. They can literally check out and then just pick up their bag on the way out. So they never have to be in contact with anybody. And for some of our consumers right now, that's a really important value add. For other consumers, they want to come through the group tour, they want to have a tour guide, but they want a time slot so that they know that there's only a certain number of people in the store and that they're safe and protected. So again, it's on a spectrum. But then we've been able to do all these really, really cool things, right, outside of the four walls of our store, because people are looking for new experiences online. And that includes, our live video shopping, but it also includes the fact that all of our brands that are now in our store, on their websites, you can click go live, and you can go live to show fields and ask questions about that product. So at any time, you can just be like, hey, I want to see how the shirt fits. I want to go live, and it goes live directly into our store. So
that's cool. So someone could try it on or hold it up or answer any questions.
Like, is the fabric heavy? Is it light? Like, what does it look like? Hold it up. How long is it? And these are like the questions that maybe you can't find online just by searching. And that's why in store is so important, which is why we wanted to have a live experience.
Yeah. And then I know when I was in there, like one of the things that was amazing was you'd have these, like, do you call them chefs, if I recall? Is that right? Your guides are chefs?
We call them storytellers.
Storytellers, okay. But they were like, they had all these products, so I mean, obviously now trying on products is going to be a little bit tricky because obviously COVID, people can't touch the same thing. Are you seeing that some of the brands are using AR and alternative ways to kind of create that experience?
We haven't seen it in our physical location, but I'm seeing it around the globe. And I think it's an incredible movement of trying to take a piece of technology to make people feel more comfortable. And again, I don't believe in technology for technology's sake. I think you should always do something with intention. And if the intentionality is making your consumer feel safe, awesome. That's a great addition to any environment. For us, we are arming our hosts who are going through with each group with the the ability to wash down everything. So if someone tries on a pair of sunglasses, they literally wash it down right in front of you, hand it to you, and then after you're done, they wash it down again. And we're finding that customers are super comfortable with that interaction. But, you know, you've got to take care of everybody in this world right now. You can't be just out there being like, well, we're open, everybody come on in.
Yeah, definitely people are cautious. Well, the other reason I think stores exist or have existed in the past is the convenience factor. You know, is that still an important issue, and what can be done kind of to improve the convenience factor for stores these days?
So we have a brand right now called Cabinet. And Cabinet has a medicine kit that includes acetaminophen, and it includes sort of everything you need to take care of yourself if you do get sick. And one of my favorite things that we were able to do during COVID, because we had a physical location, was to partner with Uber and have those kits delivered to people that were sick in New York City and on demand. So there are things that can be done with a physical location that can't necessarily be done with a shipping center. Delivering within an hour is one of them. But this company, Cabinet, not only was able to do that through Uber, they were actually giving out the kits for free for anyone in need. And so being able to, you know, partner with something like that was very important to us. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of trends around convenience. We're seeing a lot of people wanting to use a physical location now as sort of a second delivery space or pickup location for people that actually don't want to wait for a day for something to be shipped, especially if it's as important as medication. So having a location in the middle of Manhattan that someone can come pick something up from the front without ever having to come in, it's very meaningful to these startups right now. They wouldn't be able to afford that type of real estate normally.
Yeah, so almost like using the store as like a hub, and then people can either pick up or you can deliver from that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we both know that order from home and pick up is going nowhere. I don't know if I'm ever going in a grocery store ever again. I love curbside pickup. I think a lot of people do. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love going in stores. Clearly, I have one. But there's something really convenient about the new trends that are out there that I don't think are going anywhere. And so if you look at Home Depot and all of these other larger brands that have really leaned into that to keep their consumers safe, I think that will be something that will stay with their business model for a very long time.
Yeah, we did some research, CommerceNext with BizRate, about a month ago, and we asked consumers, we were trying to understand which COVID habits would stick. Online shopping, obviously one that's definitely going to stick. People who tried it for the first time, they like it. Like most people say they're going to continue to do it. Maybe not for every purchase, but people tend to want to stay with it. But curbside was one of the top ones that people really found that they tried for the first time and enjoyed it. You know, especially if you think about some of these big box store formats, instead of having to go around Lowe's, Home Depot, find your product, if you can just order online, they put it in your trunk, it's pretty convenient. So
yeah, super life-changing. I mean, I think I'm a convert for sure.
Let's kind of look beyond today. What is your perspective on the future of stores? You know, what are the biggest challenges or changes, I guess, you would predict in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think the bigger challenges are going to be around the larger spaces. I think that people are going to get smaller and more curated. And I think that we have a big hole now around what the department store looks like and what that is going to encompass, or what the mall looks like. And I think there's going to be a ton of innovation in both of those spaces. We already see people like American Dream out in New Jersey creating actual theme parks and aquariums within the mall in order to, you know, drive a new type of commerce within a mall setting and really push that envelope forward. But I think consumers now, in the same way that it used to be that the movie theater was linked to the mall, are still looking for, you know, more than just a reason around shopping to be someplace. So to have a timeout market food hall, or to have something that is in line and a destination for this generation in another way, is going to be super meaningful for the larger spaces. I think that our bigger brands are going to move to smaller curated spaces. So we'll have to see what that does to, you know, the Fifth Avenues of the world. But for us, I think flexible retail will definitely be something that will take hold now. a lot of people are not going to want to take the amount of risk on their portfolio around retail as they have before. So when you look at direct-to-consumer companies who've gone the path of opening hundreds of stores and have been very successful on that front, it's not that they're not going to want to do that because they know how meaningful that is for them as a business, but maybe they're less likely to sign 100 independent leases going forward. So I do think we're going to see a lot of flexible retail models coming into the space.
Yeah, more like, I mean, maybe it's a bad analogy, like WeWork for retail, where you can kind of check in and check out as you need to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, I think your point about the entertainment is spot on. Did a hard hat tour of American Dream early on, and they're doing something like over 50% of their space is non-retail. I think it's 55% like food and entertainment and 45% retail. It used to be, yeah, it used to be that the stores were the draw with like some like little entertainment. And now it's like you really, it's about the experience, and the stores are like what you do while you're like experiencing everything else. It's crazy.
They have an actual roller coaster in there. And a water park. It's one of the more insane things I've ever seen, but I believe it will work. Yeah. I do believe that it's going to be a younger millennial parent who's going to be there versus, you know, potentially an older shopper or a single shopper. So I don't think anyone's fully cracked the code there of like, what is the experience and the elevated experience for someone who's single in their 30s or for somebody who's in their 50s? What does that look like? And what does the luxury high end of it look like? To be determined if American Dream can also crack that. But I think those models remain to be seen, but the millennial parent will have a lot of really fun things to do coming up.
Awesome. Well, Katie, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. So much to kind of reimagine.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's always such a pleasure, and it's always such an amazing moment to take a step back and look at all the things that we're working on over here and be really grateful for the team. So I really appreciate you having me.
Awesome. Well, now we're going to go to another audience poll. And actually, sorry, before we do, I'm going to run through some quick housekeeping. For those of you who are just joining, don't worry if you missed anything. We have all of the slides available for downloads. The recording will be available later this week, and you can ask the speakers questions, and I'm going to quickly show you how. So just a reminder, the QA box is on the right. Please use that to ask questions. You just click there, answer your questions on the bottom, and then the questions will be published once they're screened. If you see any question that's relevant to you, upvote that question. And then that will help us prioritize those questions after some of them are being answered live and some of them are being answered after the sessions. Finally, we have handouts, which include the pocket agenda, the slides, some additional materials from our sponsors. Those are in the handout section. And then, of course, for those watching this on replay, you can download the handouts from the bottom of your player. So, quick poll. How much e-commerce growth did your business see in the last 3 to 4 months? Over 100%, 75 to 100%, 50 to 74%, 25 to 49%, 0 to 24, or did your e-commerce business decline? You just want to take a couple minutes to answer those. Really, really interesting results. The most popular answer was over 100% e-commerce growth. Then the second most popular was the other end of the spectrum, which was 0 to 24% e-commerce growth. So really seems like it's all over the place. Maybe it's a matter of where your business lies, but really interesting results. Thank you all for taking the polls. Our next session is all about accelerating e-commerce growth and the impact of COVID-19 on e-commerce. We have some really interesting data that Indy Guha, SVP of Marketing and Strategic Alliances, is going to share. And then he's going to do a fireside chat with Emma Lawson from Huda. Indy, over to you.
Hi, everyone. This is Indy Guha. I lead marketing and partnerships at Signified. If I look vaguely familiar to you, it's because I'm told I'm one of the hero images on the CommerceNext homepage. So thankfully for everybody here, that is as close as I will get to a modeling career. Thank you, Veronica and Alan and Scott, for that. And then probably worth noting, we're going to fly through a lot of data today because I want to really get to the star of the show, Emma, to talk about all of the innovative things they're doing at Huda. So if you want to refer back to the data, I think as Veronica noted, you can access the handout from the handout section of the video panel here. So with that, let's dive in. So for context, Signified works with a lot of different cosmetics merchants, including being lucky enough to work with Huda, Revlon, Tatcha, etc. And this data is the aggregate across all of them. And it's a pretty good way to think about what's happening within this category. And we'll touch on some of the other categories we see in our network as well. So first, kind of framing comment for you all, and you've heard this theme a few times today. We started the year saying, hey, e-commerce on average will grow 12 to 15% in the US. And that is kind of where January shook out. Since then, there's been a dramatic acceleration, peaking in May before finding what looks like a new normal that is roughly 35 to 70% higher than last year's sales. So this data is adjusted for seasonality, and the gap between the magenta bar or line and the gold line is really year-over-year growth. And early data for July is that it's going to look a lot like June. For those of you who don't know, Signified sits in the payments layer, so this is all based on transactional data and actual e-commerce sales across our merchant base. Pretty handy real-time feed of what's happening. I think it's important to note that within that same-store sales growth, realities are very different across different categories. If you look over to the left at leisure and outdoor, this is everything from musical instruments to sporting goods. As the average consumer fights boredom, this category has exploded. As the average consumer invests in their home because they're spending a lot of time in it, home goods and decor has exploded. Obviously, on the opposite end, business supplies, offices are closed. It's a tough time to be in that space. And then there's a set of categories in between that really vary across a lot of different patterns by geography and kind of by where we are in shelter-in-place land. You can also think about that different outcomes by category story almost as a hierarchy of needs. So if you look at which categories popped at the top of the crisis, first was grocery and household goods, which makes sense, stockpiling of supplies. Sorry to say the other category that had this exact same pattern was weapons and firearm accessories and survival gear. The next category to spike was electronics, which makes sense. I figured out how to feed my family. I still have to do work. Let me upgrade my home office setup. And the next category that spiked after that was leisure and outdoor. I've got my bases covered. I'm bored to tears. Let me try to do better. And certainly keep the kids occupied so I can do work. I'm sure some of you have lived through that. Conversely, anything that's viewed as non-essential has really had a choppy path. And we're going to explore some of the really interesting learnings with Huda in the beauty and cosmetics category. In luxury goods, you saw this really big collapse at sort of the depths of the crisis before a pretty interesting bounce back as psychologically people found a new normal. For those of you thinking about international expansion and cross-border e-commerce, it's worth noting that we are seeing this same pattern of e-commerce acceleration in every market. Again, I encourage you to read this chart offline. I'm not going to go into it a lot of detail, but the way to read it is first bar is market size, second bar is the original analyst average growth rate assumption for 2020 to 2024. And the gray bar is the actual growth rate we're seeing in the Signified data. So for example, in North America, we're seeing 60% growth in Canada versus analyst expectations of 7%. And you can kind of see the same movie play out in just about every single market. What's driving this? How should you think about second half planning? What site experience investments should you be thinking about? This is really a new to the channel story in e-commerce. We are seeing a big surge of first-time e-commerce shoppers hitting across our merchant websites. The surge in Q2 is comparable to the peak of first-time shoppers we saw in holiday season 2019. And they are maturing into repeat users at a much faster rate than you would have thought. If it's helpful to think of it this way, if I'm over 60 and I really don't want to step into a physical retail space, I may have historically been resistant to e-commerce, but I have to embrace the channel now, which really changes what types of assortment resonates. And I think that's what this chart sort of speaks to. This shows discounting strategy, really average order value by different verticals. And again, this is actual data across our 100 billion plus of transaction value that flows through our systems. And you can see how some of the non-essential categories or categories that are dealing with seasonal inventory have adopted heavy discounting strategies to stay top of mind with consumers. Whereas other categories that are more essential, like CPG and baby, haven't had to go there. And a couple of other quick hits. You've heard about curbside pickup a few times today. This chart is really meant to show you actual data on that. The magenta line is the percentage of e-commerce sales in our network that are designated as omnichannel, curbside, or in-store pickup. You can see the surge in this channel through the spring, finding a new normal at about triple pre-crisis levels, and then picking up again as more retailers roll out these types of programs. So with that, I think, Emma, I could do a terrible job of introducing all of the wonderful things that Huda Beauty is working on, but maybe perfect. I see you've hopped on. Share a little bit about the Huda brand story, and let's dive into how you all have been navigating the crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. Just checking you can hear me.
Absolutely.
Good. So yeah, just a quick introduction. I'm the Global Director of E-commerce at Huda Beauty. So I look after specifically the direct-to-consumer channel, for which it's been a very busy few months, as you've just shown us. A little bit about Huda for anybody who might not be familiar with the brand. Huda Beauty is a global cosmetics brand. We sell color cosmetics, fragrance, and as of this year, we sell skincare. We sell across the world, so we have a truly global customer, primarily through wholesale partners, and then we ship to about 160 countries from our owned and operated website, which is the part of the business I look after. And yeah, the story of Huda Beauty is a pretty impressive one. So the brand is named after our founder, Huda Katan. She is a real celebrity in the beauty world. She started out as a makeup artist and a beauty blogger over 10 years ago. We just celebrated 10 years of her blog recently. And she gained a lot of traction by just knowing everything there is to know about beauty, having a really engaged following. And she kind of came to fame within that first wave of Instagram influencer, beauty influencers. Actually, today she has over 46 million followers on Instagram. So she's arguably one of, if not the biggest beauty influencer out there, and has an extremely engaged audience. So we're in a really unique position where we have, the cosmetics brand that she launched back in 2013. She started with false eyelashes and then grew out a robust line of cosmetics. She also has a fragrance line that's managed along with her sister, who helps her run the business. And then we launched skincare earlier this year. So she has a really robust product offering, and then all of this rich content from the years of running the blog and a very engaged audience. And fun fact, Cosmetify recently released an index report ranking Huda Beauty as the #1 most popular beauty brand of 2020 recently. So she's doing pretty well for herself.
Awesome. Thank you, Emma. So let's dive in. I just shared some, network-wide data that showed a lot of choppiness in cosmetics sales through the spring. Just curious what the pattern's been at Huda as you look back over the last few months and what that might mean for the second half.
Yeah, great data. I love that slide. In short, that is pretty much exactly what we've seen. We saw the dip those first few weeks when, reality hit and survival was what was on everyone's mind. And then there's some various things that we've done since then to essentially see an upswing that you demonstrated, where we've had some of our best months on the e-commerce platform in history, actually, over the past 3-4 months. What I thought was interesting about the data, we saw it very choppy like that across the board. There definitely was some differences in various markets. So, for example, US is a big market for us, and there was a lot of volatility there. With the dip off in March, with the swing back, like you said, as people started to get bored at home, they're actually, sitting on their phone and they're making purchases still. But then I think layered on top of that, a lot of what else has been going on in the US with, the political activism, etc., that's had a huge impact on what we've seen in consumer behavior. Some markets, I would say maybe like Australia, some of the areas in the Middle East that are other larger markets for us, still saw a strong swing back, but not quite the same volatility as we've seen in the US. So we've been trying to, really keep an eye on the parts of the world that are moving in the different directions as part of this roller coaster. But in short, yes, very, very similar to what you showed there.
That's really interesting perspective, and I'm sure a few folks in the audience are thinking about their cross-border plans. So, wouldn't be surprised if they have some questions for you on all the countries you're touching. Let's make this a little more real for the audience. Turn back the clock. It's March 19th in LA. You've just gotten your shelter-in-place order. What were some of the scenarios as you sort of logged into work that day you were worried about, and I guess how has reality played out? And obviously that current reality is not an accident. I think you did some pretty innovative things. Would love to set the stage on that.
Yeah, sure. So it feels like a lifetime ago. I can't believe it's 4 months ago that that was kind of the reality that was hitting. I think to answer the first part of your question, what were we thinking and what was our mindset? I think, like I said, everybody was just thinking survival. I think once I realized that Amazon was sold out of hand sanitizer, we realized this is really happening. So something's not good. So, we honestly, we knew in that instant that, purchasing makeup wasn't going to be the top of priority for people at that time. Even for us running the business, the first thing that Huda and our senior leadership team did was to check in on our employees. Is everybody safe? Is everybody feeling supported? Huda was actually fantastic in making a commitment to, maintaining the entire workforce throughout the year, which she stuck to, which has been a fantastic weight off of a lot of people's, things that they need to be concerned about. So that was fantastic. And then obviously, we started to look at what scenario planning. I know that each business unit was like, okay, let me try and predict the future. But there was definitely this feeling of it being temporary at that time, which I think the whole world, started off with the assumption that it's going to be somewhat temporary. So, and that even differed across the globe, right? So, I think some of our wholesale partners in the US, they were maybe looking at 4 to 6 week periods of this is what we think the downturn is going to be as we start to need to close our stores. Whereas those, some of our wholesale partners in Europe who had been hit a lot harder by the pandemic earlier on, they were really forecasting more like 3-month scenarios at that point of not being able to open stores. So even within those different markets, the guessing of what the impact was going to be differed widely. On the e-commerce side of things, I think that we understood that immediately unemployment was an issue, disposable income was going to be an issue. So we really were just expecting a downturn to a slight degree, but we also knew that with stores closing, we would have people coming, to purchase online, and we recognized that almost immediately. So yeah, so the outlook wasn't great at the beginning, and then in terms of sort of how it's panned out, the reality has been a lot more positive than we anticipated. You showed some data a lot of industries being up, between 50 and 100%. We've certainly been seeing that on the e-commerce front. I would say that in terms of the things that we did to combat that, the first thought was, let's remove the friction to purchase. So simple things like removing the cost of shipping to the customer, which is not a cheap lever to pull on the business side, but it made a lot of sense at the time. And, after those first couple of weeks where everybody was just trying to get their hands on hand sanitizer, toilet paper, stocking up, at the supermarket, we did see people were sitting at home, they're on their phones all day, they're ordering things. I told my fiance the best part of my week is having some of my online orders showing up. So we did see that start to kind of come back, and very quickly within a few weeks actually start to see those sales kind of come back. The other thing where we thought people would no longer be worrying about wearing makeup, actually this Zoom explosion happened and people had to be more camera ready than they've ever had to be before. So we did still see people looking for makeup. We also leaned into the kind of discount message that was happening very broadly. I feel like at the end of March, beginning of April, there's a lot of brands, running discounts to encourage those sales. So we did kind of like a self-love sale to lean into the authenticity of the brand, not ignore what's happening, but kind of say like, treat yourself, which performed really, really well. April was one of the best months we've seen on our e-commerce platform. And then lastly, one of the things that turned out...
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was going to say the luckiest sort of timing, we'd actually just launched our skincare brand in February. So this was an entire new brand launched under the Huda Beauty portfolio. For skincare, it was picked up really, really positively by the industry in February. And so as we moved into this space where we saw that shift, that pivot into the skincare category, we really leaned into that. So across all of our marketing channels, that's what we're focused on talking about. We actually had a few launches within that skincare line that were planned for later in the year that we pulled up slightly, face masks, things like that, and spoke to that a lot, which helped us to really move into that shift that we're seeing in the industry.
Yeah, I find that fascinating in light of the data we were sharing earlier around how things viewed as essential saw a dramatic surge in e-commerce. And I'm probably not the target audience, but it feels like skincare is more aligned to essential versus kind of pure cosmetics.
Yeah,
so that's an interesting shift for sure. I know we're short on time. I do want to hit one of the really interesting things I think you did, which was this notion of a virtual consult. And I think somebody named Rachel Moy actually posted a question around how consumer trial has evolved in this environment. Would love to hear how you're evolving the e-commerce experience to kind of bring that service layer to the shopper journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously one of the big challenges that we faced with majority of our business being wholesale is that our in-store staff, so our makeup artists who are in Sephora or Selfridges or Harrods, selling our product to the consumer in a very personal, tactile way, they obviously could no longer do that. So that was actually one of the first things we did, was think about how do we bring that to the e-commerce experience. So we built out a virtual consultations kind of booking system, pretty simple in terms of the way that we did it, but we had select artists who were available throughout the day, and you could set up a video call with them like this. And that was extremely successful. Within, a week of having that live, a lot of those artists had their days filled. And that was really nice. And they had people calling in for anything from looking to help them with shade matching. So one of the hardest things to sell over e-commerce, over digital platform versus in person, is complexion, is actually matching your foundation to your skin type. So there were people dialing in to do that. We also had people whose weddings had had to be cancelled given everything going on. And they were doing socially distanced weddings, and without being able to hire a makeup artist, they were actually using these appointments to go through how they would do their makeup for their wedding. So there were really nice stories coming out of it, and the consultants were able to really engage with the customer. And it's a feature that we intend to keep now, actually. Again, it goes back to this idea of we did all these things with this temporary notion in mind, but the reality is this is the new normal, and it isn't going to go right back to how it is. And I guess on that note, sort of how are we going to further, try to emulate that in-store experience, knowing that people might not be comfortable going back to buy cosmetics in store. That is something that's a huge focus for us. How do we, is it that we increase the way we offer, samples, or the way you can try product? Is it that, when you land on the product page and you come to learn something about the product, how are we giving you the information that you might be getting if you were in the store? So that's a huge part of the strategy, not even just for my team as part of e-commerce, but for the wider company. How do we really pivot in that digital direction?
Thank you, Emma. I don't know, Veronica or Alan, if one of you want to tag in to transfer sessions, but I'd close with the thought that this idea of future-proofing and bringing that store experience online during the shopping session is a really powerful one. We've seen it work for Huda. We're seeing it work across many of our largest clients. And I think that's a key learning as everyone starts thinking about the holiday season. But thanks for joining us, Emma.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Indy, Emma, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure. I think that there were some additional questions for you guys. And if you want to turn your cameras off and answer them in the chat, we'd love it for you to just take a moment to answer the audience questions.
Will do. Thank you, guys.
Sure.
Thank you. Great. I have one more poll question just to keep you all on your toes. I know it's the end of the day. I'm going to kick this off. What kind of purpose-driven brand incentives matter most for you? And I'm going to ask you to select all that apply here. Sustainability, giving back, fair labor practices for employees, political advocacy, or none of the above. It seems like, and it's actually not surprising, that sustainability was the most important purpose-driven brand initiative, followed by giving back, and then fair labor practices. So very interesting results. Thank you for participating. All right. Our last session is all about brand's purpose. We're going to hear from Nate Checketts, CEO of Roan, and Glossy Media's editor-in-chief, Jill Manoff, and they're going to talk about brand purpose and also lessons learned from Brands Buy Better.
All right. Hi, Nate. Thanks for
Hi, Jill.
Me.
Oh, this is great. It's great to see you even virtually.
Yes, excited to chat. We are talking to you today about brand purpose. We have a lot to dig into. Definitely want to start with the Brands for Better campaign. What inspired it all? Yeah, you kicked that off fast, April.
It did. It came together very fast, and certainly I cannot take full credit for it. But the idea came about, in the early stages of COVID. I think all of us were concerned about so many different things, right? We were concerned about our health, about our families' well-being, our livelihoods, and being in the retail sector. I think one thing that I felt challenged with is what can I do to help? What can I do to make an impact? And so there were a couple of events that happened close to each other that kind of led to the idea, which was, I sat down. I have 3 sons. I sat them down and I said, all right, Dad's going to be home more and you're going to be home from school, and we've got an opportunity to work on whatever skill you've always wanted to learn. And I don't know how this came about. I don't know if they saw some show, but they decided they wanted to learn how to skateboard, which is interesting because I don't really know how to skateboard either. So I said, great, let's figure it out. And so I went on this search trying to find a way to buy from some great skateboarding shop that would be some small kind of maybe a digitally native brand, and even within 30 minutes of searching, I couldn't find a brand that I really wanted to shop for. I found kind of all these wholesalers and obviously the big players in the space in commerce, and all this shift you hear about Amazon adding 100,000 jobs and Walmart adding 150,000 jobs. And then I did notice all of my kind of peers in this digitally native world all doing their part to contribute to COVID-19 relief. And I thought to myself, there's got to be a way to help encourage consumers to find brands that stand for something, brands that stand for the way they treat their employees, the way they treat their supply chain and their partners, and the way that they treat their customers, obviously, to support them in this process, and to have those brands stand united in making a difference for brands that were on the fence of donating. And so I just kind of challenged myself. I said, do I know enough brands that I could kind of reach out to? And after sitting down at a computer, I had a list of 110 brands that I had relationships with, and I just started reaching out like crazy, text, email, phone calls. And quickly we had about 30 brands ready to go, and that's how it kicked off. And it led to 150 brands overall, and almost $4 million of relief funds to COVID-19 related charities.
I mean, it's amazing. Congrats, kudos. Like, that's a huge accomplishment. It happened over the course of a month. Is that correct?
Well, initially so from idea to launch, I think it was about a week and a half. But then we ended up extending. So we launched officially April 1, and then we were only planning to do it for a month, but the reaction and interest from brands participating and from consumers and press was so strong that we decided to extend it an additional month. So it ended up running for a total of 2 months.
Amazing. Was there any criteria other than a direct-to-consumer brand? Did you find a skateboard brand? I mean.
I looked. I didn't. Oh, man, I'm still looking. So if you're out there, great digital native skateboard brand, please let me know.
White space in the market.
Yeah, exactly. Who knew? But you know, I think in terms of the criteria, we kept it open as much as possible, but we also tried to create some hurdle or bar that brands needed to live up to. And there were a few things that, you know, the main thing was that we wanted brands to be contributing to COVID-19 relief. And they could do that either by donating 2% of their sales for the period of time, or what we call 10% of net proceeds. And it could have been greater than that. The second thing is that we asked all brands to give some customer relief, because customers were also kind of evaluating what they were going to be spending their dollars on, and how they were, how they were spending money. We understood that some people weren't spending because of the uncertainty in the market, but for those that were, we wanted to give them some breaks. So there were GWPs, there were straight discounts, there were discounts that were only accessed through the Brands for Better website, which was really cool and unique. And then lastly, you know, we basically said that we asked brands to kind of to be at their best, to support their team, to support their supply chain and manufacturers, and to work to support their customers. And I think those were the main criteria. We also built a Slack group that brought all of the brand leaders together, and an email group. We had several phone calls where we had over 100 participants, CEOs of these brands, including some publicly traded brands with the CEOs joining. It was an incredible initiative, and very, very proud how it came together.
Yes, I was hearing about some of these Slack channels, Slack groups that had emerged since March. I kept saying I would love to be a fly on the wall to hear kind of how it's interesting that you're working together, talking through challenges and strategies together. Was that a first for the industry, or for your brand?
Well, I think it just, it certainly wasn't a first to have leaders in a room discussing challenges, but I think what was different about this is that it was led within the kind of coalition. This was not led by some third-party service provider trying to sell all of us something, or an alumni group, or even a shared portfolio investor. This was leaders helping each other. And what was really cool about it is people would ask questions. How are you tackling this problem that might be coming up? Or how are you dealing with this HR issue? A lot of people were trying to determine whether or not they would qualify for PPP loans, how to apply for that, how to go through that process. And there was so much noise in the market that this kind of became a center of truth, where there was no hidden agenda. None of us were trying to sell each other anything. We were just trying to help each other and to support the cause. And I thought it just felt, some nonprofit work can feel a little bit mixed in its approach. This felt very well-intentioned, pure.
Yeah. We talked in the past about your, I guess maybe the questions that arose leading up to April 1st. I know one had to do with competitors. Talk to me about what other questions arose and yeah, how you navigated that or overcame those questions, made it okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it was just such an interesting time. But I can't think of another time, certainly in my lifetime, where there's been such a rallying cry where everybody could be united against a single thing. And you know, even in the landscape that we're living in right now, so much gets politicized when it comes to standing for something. And this wasn't, you know, everybody was standing for helping support each other through COVID. And even COVID's become somewhat politicized now. But in those early stages, it was so wonderful that everybody was kind of locking hands. But there were some concerns. You know, some early brands, including myself, was, well, you know, what happens if we have a competitor join? And so we had conversations around that. And ultimately, I said, you know what, I want to proactively reach out to brands that could be considered competitive, because if we truly believe that this is about providing as much relief as possible, then we need to maximize our exposure. Not all of them joined, but many of them did, and I think it created space for brands to feel similarly that way. And you know, this was certainly not just me. The Roan team pulled a huge amount of the work, but we also had great help from Dagny Dover, another great a women's handbag brand that I love. They did all of the creative and website work. We also had brands step in and help on social media and creating assets and doing PR work and communications. So it was a team effort for sure.
Yeah. In this kind of high stress time, was it a big decision to maybe add this onto your team's plate? How were they dividing
Yes.
their time?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. I think there were a couple of factors going into that. I mean, one, you tend in these situations to kind of focus on efficiency, and with all that uncertainty, you know, I think we felt confident about trying to keep as many people on our team um, really productive and keeping them busy and doing good things. Some of that couldn't be accomplished just by the work that we had, and so Brands for Better was a way of kind of positively contributing to what we were trying to do as a brand and keeping our team really meaningfully engaged. But certainly there were opportunity costs in making that decision of things that they could be spending their time on. And I think, you know, what I went back to, and people have asked, we ended up at Roan donating well over 6 figures in COVID-19 relief. And you know, people have said, well, do you feel like you saw an economic benefit or gain as a result of doing the campaign? And the answer is, I don't know. My guess is probably not, based on the initial metrics, but that's not why we did it. Doing the right thing is the right thing to do, no matter if it's kind of economically advantageous or not. And if we couldn't get comfortable with that decision, then we shouldn't have been doing it in the first place. And that's how I felt also about our team's engagement. And I think they felt very similar, even though it might, you know, those first 2 weeks, we were all working so much. You know, my wife was like, I think I might want you to go back to the office schedule. But we were just all working so hard, so many hours to try and get that initial launch off. And but it was work we were happy to do because of the potential impact that it could have.
Moving forward, I guess, what is going to, you kind of alluded to the change, the shift, the fact that things are going to stick this time. I feel like social media and accountability, followers, holding brands accountable is going to play into that a little bit. But what's your take on whether this will stick? Brands holding true to their values, being more vocal about their values. Where do we go from here?
You know, I think the challenge is that it's easy to put out mission statements and ethos, and I think there are even some brands that had perceptions of being brands that really stood for something, where some of those cracks may have been exposed during a time of economic uncertainty. It's far harder and by no means in saying this do I think we're perfect, but I do think it's really important to be said. We can put our mission statement on our website. We can, write it on our walls. But if we are not, daily talking about it in our meetings, or, really trying to reinforce it or live it, especially at the leadership level of the company, then it just doesn't matter. And, in times of difficulty or trial, those cracks will be exposed. I don't remember who said it, but I love the quote of adversity introduces a person to him or herself. And I think that's true about a company too. In moments of adversity, you really get a chance to see who you are, who people that you have around you. How are they going to react when things go wrong or there's a challenging situation? And so I hope that it sticks. I hope all of us have a chance to look in the mirror. I do also want to make space for the fact that there's a part of this where we can quickly demonize companies, individuals, in an unfair way, where somebody slips and says not exactly the right thing, or we try too hard to rush to judgment and surround people. At the end of the day, this is about seeing each other as humans, about making somebody else's hopes, fears, dreams as real to us as it is to them, and to keep that in mind, whether we're in a digital social media environment, Zoom conference, or something else. I hope that if nothing else, this has humanized us to each other. Ironically, even though most of it's happened virtually, our interactions.
Definitely. Is there anything that you've done or that you feel the need to do in order to, as the pressure is out there and brands are becoming more transparent, it's important to be transparent. Have there been changes that you've had to make in order to do so? Or it's just about, I think you used the word authenticity, like you can be transparent no matter, again, what I ask you, because it's just like true to who you are. But how would you describe, the need for transparency?
I think it's important. There is a positive side to this social media accountability, which is, having a social pressure to do the right thing isn't necessarily bad, right? Yeah. I don't think you can live in today's world and be a terrible person in terms of the way you treat your fellow employees, in terms of the way you might treat your direct reports, or how you treat direct customers, and get away with that. 20 years ago, you might have been able to. But people's reputations have a tendency to follow them, for better or for worse, in a way that they just haven't in the past. I think being authentic and being transparent is important, and doing the hard work there. I could certainly cite several examples of some of the work that we've needed to do internally, and that we've spent time on, how we're measuring ourselves, making some of those, corporate social responsibility metrics key indicators in our business of how we're actually performing, in addition to revenue, gross margin, lifetime value. But measuring ourselves on things like diversity, sustainability, giving, and it's important that we track those things, because if we don't track them and we don't spend time on them, they won't change.
Well, thank you, Nate. I think we're all out of time. This was a great discussion.
Well, that went too fast. I'm sorry if I spoke too much, but it's great speaking to you as always.
That was our last session for the first day of the CommerceNext Virtual Summit. Just a couple reminders. We're back with our weekly webinar series on Wednesday, August 12th at 2 p.m. And it's on why 2020 is actually the year of mobile. Also, the Holiday Optimization Summit is on October 7th at 1 p.m. Just save the date for that. We'll have registration open shortly. And then we're going to send out a survey on Thursday. We really want you to tell us how we did. This is our first virtual summit. We've done a lot of webinars. We want to really learn from this experience. So please take a moment to take the survey. You'll also be entered to win a gift card for Amazon. So a little bit of an incentive to do that. Wonderful. Well, we'll be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. If you have any questions, email us at founders@CommerceNext. Otherwise, we will see you tomorrow.